story begins at a military base known as Area 51, and we see a man named Albert doing a countdown to activate a mysterious gate. Suddenly, the scene shifts to a completely different world, full of bizarre and disgusting-looking creatures. One of them appears, huge and even more terrifying than the others, and he steps on another creature at the same moment as the smaller creatures start to approach them. A little later, we see Albert talking to Doug, the head of the whole operation. Albert tells him that he's really worried because of some strange movements he noticed near the gates. But Doug ignores his warnings and doesn't pay him any attention. On the contrary, he reveals to him that he's planning to send his son Trent to one of the facilities on the other side. Albert tries to warn him about how dangerous this is, but Doug insists on his decision and tells him that Trent himself is really excited about this mission, and to reassure Albert. Doug tells him that Nolan will also be going with his son on the trip. After that, we see Trent talking to Jenny, who isn't hiding at all that she's upset and thinks he hasn't done anything to deserve this position. Trent listens to her silently without any reaction because he knows she's right. At that moment, Nolan enters the room and tells them that Doug wants to talk to both of them. After that, Nolan takes the two young men to a secret room and starts telling them about the history of the research that has been done over the past years. He reveals to them that in 1951, a frequency was detected coming from a planet that showed signs of intelligent life. Since then, they've been conducting many experiments through the gates. They send transmitters to that world. The problem is that all the devices they sent would decompose and disintegrate along the way. Only one device managed to successfully pass through a certain gate, but it never came back. After that, the scene changes and we see Painting and Nightclub busy robbing the customers. One of their targets is a man named Colt, and one of the girls approaches him and starts a conversation without him noticing anything. Colt gets robbed, and his wallet is quietly passed to the girl's partner, the thief. And then we go back again to the military base. Shortly after, Doug enters the room, greets Jenny, and asks the two young men to come with him to the control room so they can see one of the gates up close. There, Doug explains to them that Albert has a theory that these gates get stronger year after year, and that this could be a sign of a possible attack. Suddenly, the gate starts acting strangely in a way no one expected, and its levels reach the danger zone. Nolan was watching everything closely and admits that Albert was right about the risks. The color of the gate changes, and right before our eyes, a terrifying monster starts coming out of it. Nolan moves closer to get a better look, but he's shocked when the monster swallows him, and the whole place descends into panic and chaos. The army opens fire, but more monsters start coming out, devouring anyone they find in their path. Doug, Trent, and Jenny manage to escape at the last moment, but the monsters break through the underground base's defenses. They start chasing after them, sending smaller creatures after the car. Chaos spreads throughout Area 51, and the gunfire seems completely useless against the approaching monsters. Doug drives the car and takes the two young people to an old military hideout nearby. Jenny, in a state of despair, tries to call her family, but the gates are causing interference with communications. Any attempt to make contact is impossible. The monsters reach the city and start attacking civilians. The three of them run to the old abandoned base to hide in the shelter. When they arrive, they find Lori, Doug's wife, coming up the shelter stairs. They also find a man and two girls. One of the girls is in very bad shape. Lori quickly goes over to help her. But suddenly, a voice comes from the security cameras saying that this is a restricted area. Doug introduces himself as the head of secret operations in Area 51. The man responds and tells him they can come in, but the civilians have to stay outside. Doug refuses this condition, yells at him, and tells him to open the door immediately before they can reply. Everyone hears a sound coming from outside. The soldiers quickly open the door and everyone rushes inside. A huge monster had been lurking outside, waiting for them. The soldiers try to fend it off by shooting at it, but they quickly retreat and go back into the base. After that, they take Doug to meet Lieutenant Brian, who from the very first moment looks like he can't stand having all these people in the shelter. Doug explains to him that the portal, which used to work, has undergone some serious changes. And right after that, the monsters came out and completely destroyed Area 51. Brian really didn't like the idea of having to feed more people at a time like this, which could be the end of the world, but he agreed to let them stay even though he was clearly annoyed. At the same time, Trent and Jenny were in the bathroom, and Trent was trying to calm her down because she was really worried about her family and couldn't get any signal on her phone. The guy manages to distract her for a moment and gives her a piece of chocolate. Meanwhile, in the sleeping quarters, Helen, the sick woman, was hiding her health condition because she was afraid they'd kick them out of the shelter. And when Ellen goes to look for some medicine, she sees a plate full of parasites next to the bed. After that, the soldiers manage to tune in to the right frequency so Ginny can talk to her family. She starts to tell them the location of the shelter, but the signal suddenly cuts out, and one of the soldiers tells her it's better to give up because her family is probably already dead. In a moment of anger and frustration, Ginny blames Doug for everything that's happening. He accepts the accusations in silence without objecting, but he says he'll keep his promise and mentions that there's a nearby military base, and he's going to go there himself. Especially since Ginny managed to tell her family the location before the line got cut. He's convinced there's still a chance to find them. Trent goes to his father, his eyes filled with tears, and begs him not to leave. Doug says he can't just leave innocent people like that. Lori calms her son down and asks Doug to come back quickly as he's about to leave. Two of the soldiers decide to go with him, and the three of them head toward the exit and get into the car. As soon as they start moving, a monster appears. Trent and Brian have a quick chat, and Brian reassures the boy, telling him everything will be all right, and asks him to go to Ginny for comfort. We go back to the three in the car heading to the military base. They arrive at the place, but they don't find anyone there, and Doug warns them to stay alert. We see that the monster that appeared earlier has followed them all the way to the military facility. At that moment, the guys are chatting with each other, wondering how things got to this point. And to pass the time, Ginny suggests they play cards. Don't. The soldiers continue their way inside the base. They hear a sound, but keep going, while the monster is still watching them from a distance. They take a break, and Jake suggests that they split up. The other soldier refuses and says that's a stupid idea. Doug quickly settles the matter and tells them to just follow him, no questions asked. Meanwhile, in the hideout, Trent asks his mom if she can take a break, and she actually leaves, so they're left alone to play cards. A little later, Trent contacts his dad, and Doug tells him that they couldn't find Jenny's family. Suddenly, one of the monsters appears. They start shooting at it and run toward one of the base's entrances. The monster tries to get in, but it can't. A little later, we see the two civilians talking in the bathroom. The man introduces himself as Colt, and the woman thanks him for bringing them here and reveals her name is Elaine. Colt asks her if Helen is okay, and Elaine lies, telling him yes. In a tense moment, her bag falls, and as he bends down to help her, he spots his stolen wallet among her things. Feeling disappointed, Colt tells her that she just wanted to use him because he was a soldier. Then he leaves the room and walks out, and that night, while everyone is asleep, we see that one of the parasites manages to enter Helen's body. Helen wakes up in the middle of the night and notices something strange moving inside her arm. She screams and wakes up. Elaine immediately asks her if she's okay, but Helen starts to convulse. Elaine calls out for anyone to help her, and Lori rushes over to assist. They take Helen to the shelter's clinic. Lieutenant Brian shows up quickly to offer his help. Helen screams in pain while Colt tries to help, and Lori asks Elaine what's happening to her friend. Elaine, terrified, just says that Helen was sick even before they arrived at the base. Brian examines the woman's arm and sees creatures moving under her skin. He says he needs something to remove them immediately. Trent and Jenny, who were playing cards in the room, hear the screaming and rush out to see what happened. At the same time, Lieutenant Brian talks to Colt and tells him about what he saw in Helen's arm. Brian warns Colt that the two girls are hiding something from them, and Colt agrees with his suspicion. After that, Trent and Jenny join them and ask what's going on. Brian explains that Helen had a seizure and asks if any of them noticed anything strange, but they deny it. So Brian reveals to them that she might have been infected with some kind of virus and asks the two guys to go to the control room to get something that could fight the infection. We go back to the other group, and they're in an underground tunnel. One of the soldiers asks if there's another exit. Doug confirms that there is, and they decide to follow him. On the way, Doug hears a sound and changes his path. He finds a man who looks like Jenny's father. Doug tells him that Jenny is okay, but the man doesn't respond. When Doug gets closer, the man turns around and attacks him, and it becomes clear that he's been taken over by an alien parasite. He spits out a strange substance onto Doug, who also becomes controlled by the parasites. At that moment, the soldiers are still looking for Doug. They hear noises, so they decide to leave through the back exit of the tunnel. They guess that Doug might be dead. When they hear a new sound, they run quickly, and when they reach the spot, they don't find anything and think that Doug might have left them and gone. Suddenly, the monster appears and kills one of the soldiers, and only Jake is left covered in blood, and the monster keeps crushing the other soldier. Jake doesn't waste any time and quickly runs inside to hide. At the same time, we see a terrifying shadow, and it turns out that Doug is standing still, not moving. In the hideout, the women are treating Helen, who starts screaming from the pain, and Eileen begins to lose hope. Lori tries to calm her down and asks to cover her with a cloth. Helen asks Eileen not to say anything. Lieutenant Brian arrives and shoots her in the head, explaining that the woman was infected and that everyone here is in danger. The women cry, and Helen's body is still moving. A parasite crawls out of her mouth and quickly jumps into the cold storage room. Lori notices this movement, closes the lid, and traps the creature inside. The parasite bangs against the glass until it breaks it and attacks Lori. At the same time, Brian and Colt are in another part of the shelter. Brian says they have to get rid of Helen's body. Colt refuses and asks if there isn't another solution. Brian insists that this is the only way. The soldier asks Colt to turn on the incinerator while he goes to get Helen's body. As Colt heads to the area, he finds Lori standing in front of him. He calls out to her, but she doesn't respond. He starts apologizing, saying he didn't know what Brian was planning to do. He approaches her slowly, but when she turns around, the parasite in her mouth tries to bite him. In a split second and without thinking, Colt opens the incinerator door, shoves Lori's face inside, and burns the parasite. At that moment, Eileen appears anxious as she tries to enter a locked room, with the mark of infection starting to show on her neck. She hears a sound coming from inside the room, so she runs away, frightened, through the corridors. In the control room, Trent sees his father on the cameras, and Jenny sees Doug alone, which moves her, so she tells Trent to go open the door for him. And we return to the old military base. Jake is hiding, trying to turn on his flashlight. He hears noises and realizes that the monster is stalking him, and he feels hopeless. He lights a flare he had with him and starts waving it to scare the monster. But the flare goes out quickly and the monster gets closer. Jake gets caught and eaten, and Brian rushes back to Colt's location and finds him in shock. Colt hysterically says that Lori was infected and tried to kill him. Brian tells Colt to burn Lori's body and then catch up with him. Then we see Doug walking through the bunker until he reaches the main electrical box and shuts everything off, and immediately the whole bunker loses power and all the sections go dark. Colt starts hearing noises in the ceiling, and with his gun and flashlight, he shines the light above him and follows the sounds until he finds a ventilation duct. Inside, he sees a giant parasite. He chases after the parasite to the vent exit and waits for the creature, and suddenly the parasite jumps on him and attacks. And in the control room, Jenny is crying when Brian appears and asks her if she's okay. He asks her where Trent is, so she replies and tells him that he went to see Doug, who, according to her, just came back from the old military base. But Brian says it's impossible for him to have gotten in because he's the only one with the access key. At the same time, Elaine goes down a staircase and reaches a dark corridor. She hesitates, but keeps going, and after a bit, she finds Colt's corpse, with the parasite feeding on it after it evolved. She runs and stops for a moment, but then decides to keep going and heads up the stairs, with the monster right behind her. And it climbs the stairs quickly. Elaine reaches a corridor lit with red lights and runs through it until she stops and sees a man standing there. She starts calling out to him, thinking he's Doug, but he doesn't respond either. She says they need to get out of here quickly, but when she gets closer, he starts vomiting a lot of parasites. Elaine falls to the ground and the monster gets closer. She screams for help, but no one shows up. Doug and the parasites keep getting closer, and the monster is about to attack her. Suddenly, the scene shifts to Brian and Jenny, and he asks her if she's ever used a weapon before. She takes the gun and shows him her skills in precise shooting. Brian takes the opportunity and says that Lori was killed because she was infected. Jenny asks him not to tell Trent the truth about his mom and says it's better for him to focus on surviving. Jenny seizes the moment and asks if Helen is the one responsible for bringing the parasites into the shelter. And Brian confirms it, saying he saw the same parasites moving under her arm. In a dark room, Trent is searching for his father, moving through the darkness. He sees a mannequin and gets startled, but keeps going until he spots a man and recognizes him. Doug goes to meet him and hugs him warmly, but he feels that the body is cold. And when he sees his father's deformed face, he backs away in terror. Doug starts coughing up parasites and tries to grab him, but Trent runs, grabs a walkie-talkie, and warns that they need to escape immediately. Doug catches up to him and tries to stop him, but he manages to get away. The young man goes to another place, but the infected Doug finds him and attacks him. Luckily, Jenny and Brian arrive and shoot Doug in the head, saving the boy. They continue on their way, walking through the facility. They hide and avoid being seen by the alien creatures. After that, the three of them find a tunnel filled with the monster's eggs. Unfortunately, Brian gets caught off guard and is eaten by one of them, which forces Ginny and Trent to run away. While they're by the sea in an abandoned area, they see a giant gate opening in the sky and a massive monster coming out of it. Ginny asks for forgiveness because she lied, and the two of them hug each other and prepare to die. But then fighter jets appear and attack the giant monster, hitting it and eventually causing it to collapse from exhaustion. Another plane launches a nuclear bomb that destroys the gate, and it explodes on the other side. The monster dies, and that path is closed off to the monsters forever. Fortunately, everyone is safe. Jenny and Trent hug each other, feeling a huge sense of relief that this nightmare has finally come to an end. And that's the end of the movie. See you in a new summary, and thanks for watching.